When I was a kid, the video games that really struck me were ones that had really memorable music. So games like Mega Man 2, Mega Man 3, Mega Man 4. These were games that when I look back on them, they all had really strong melodies. They're all games that decades later we can all still recall. And so I think that means they really had something powerful to them. There really was something musically significant happening there. Video game music in its early stages was almost to me like a picture in a coloring book, okay? Like the image is there, but the color's all missing. And I think every person brings to it whatever their imagination brings to it. So I think a lot of people that were older, certainly my parents, were listening to music off the NES hardware and they just heard bleeps and bloops. Like they didn't even hear music. For me, I heard in the music of Mega Man, I heard driving rock and roll heavy metal. I heard Iron Maiden. Ironically, when I later heard Iron Maiden, I said, oh, that sounds like Mega Man. If I had to think about whose influence lingers with me the most today, it might actually be Jerry Goldsmith, whose work I adored and continue to adore, but also like I admired him personally. He had an incredible work ethic. He did so much. His output was just so extreme, and his music was always so distinctive. And the other thing I really admired about him and continue to admire is that he always adapted. He always tried to explore what was new, what was dangerous, what had never been done before. You look at an example like The Planet of the Apes, the original film. It was one of the most daring scores to be put to a mainstream movie. And considering the amount of money the studio spent on that movie, for him to put something so alien and draw from a kind of classical, contemporary, intellectual, audience-shunning music that he did, it was daring, you know, and it's still like when you watch that, the main title, it's jarring. I mean, it puts you in an uncomfortable place 40 years later. I moved to Los Angeles because I wanted to go to school and learn how to score films, and I studied and mentored with Elmer Bernstein. I scored dozens of student films in my time there, and when I graduated, I became an assistant to a composer, Richard Gibbs. I didn't know at the time how directly this would lead me to something that would really change my life. But about a year and a half into working there, Richard takes on a job that is the Battlestar Galactica miniseries, which is functioning as a backdoor pilot to a full series. So on that miniseries, I was the assistant. I wrote a ton of additional music. There was a very high volume of music needed in a very short amount of time. So when it went to series, Richard had film commitments and didn't have the bandwidth to take on a television series. So knowing that I had worked with him on the miniseries, I'd written a bunch of stuff, they gave me a shot to write a couple episodes as the composer. And I sort of always understood that that would be the end of my involvement. I think they were going to be letting me do a couple episodes while they went and found a list, put together a list and really figured something out. But at the end of my first episode, they said, wow, that was really good. Why don't you come on in and let's take a look at the next episode. And I went, okay, cool. So we did the next episode, and at the mix, they went, wow, okay. Why don't you come in next week? Let's look at the next episode. And I went, okay, cool. Fast forward 70 episodes later, and that was it. And as the show evolved, that's really where my influence started to take hold. And that's where I felt like my musical DNA, in some cases literally, got into the score. So I'm half Armenian, I'm half Scotch-Irish. So the Armenian duduk snuck in and became a thematic element. The bagpipes snuck in and became a thematic element. The orchestral writing got pushed really far into the background in the early part of the show. In the end of the first season, it became clear there really was a sequence that needed orchestra, a particularly moving couple of scenes in the last 2 episodes. And I found a harmonic language that fit. So that became part of the show. We introduced elements of Indian music. We introduced elements of rock and roll. We introduced a Bob Dylan song. We introduced Italian opera. And it just started to spiral. I brought in more Japanese soloists. I brought in Native American sounds. And the show expanded so beautifully that actually I was not trying to change the score. I wasn't trying to add things just for my own sake. I was trying to keep up with the narrative. I mean, it really was such an ambitious drama, and the characters were evolving so fast and in such a realistic way. It required a score that really needed to branch off from the very restricted DNA of the miniseries. Instead, I've actually had a lot of fans let me know that they've walked down the aisle to my music dozens of times, especially Battlestar Galactica in particular. And it's really an interesting, almost terrifying thought, because what it means when people get married to my music or people have played my music at funerals, my music is written for fiction, right? There's this almost safety in knowing that I'm creating this fictional world, and so I'm creating music for it, but I'm telling a story. When you realize that this music means so much to people that they walk down the aisle to it, or like when I've had people in the military tell me that their friends were killed in action, and at their funeral they played Battlestar Galactica because of the way that show resonated and the way my music resonated with them, especially servicemen and servicewomen. It makes me feel like that safety net is gone suddenly. I'm writing music and people are using it in their real life, and sometimes it can just add extra pressure, which is intense.